The blizzard hit Idaho City so hard that Miranda Sutton couldn't see her own hands when she stretched them out in front of her face. And that was when she realized the boarding house door had locked behind her with a finality that promised frozen death. She had only stepped outside for a moment, just to grab more firewood from the stack on the porch. Mrs. Henderson, the boarding house keeper, had been so insistent that Miranda finish her evening chores before the storm arrived. And Miranda had hurried through everything so quickly that she forgot to prop the door open. Now the wind screamed around her like a living thing, tearing at her thin cotton dress and apron. The firewood lay scattered at her feet where she had dropped it in her panic. She pounded on the door with both fists, but the wood was thick and solid, built to withstand harsh mountain winters. Mrs. Henderson was likely in the back kitchen with the other boarders, too far away to hear anything over the roar of the storm. Miranda's fingers were already going numb. She had been in Idaho City for only 3 months, working as a servant at the boarding house to pay for her room and meals. At 22 years old, she had come west from Pennsylvania after her parents died of fever, hoping to find work and maybe a fresh start. The year was 1878, and Idaho City was still clinging to the remnants of its gold rush glory, though the easy pickings were long gone. What remained was a rough town of miners, ranchers, cowboys, and people trying to make honest livings in the shadow of the Boise Mountains. The cold was unlike anything she had experienced back east. It cut through her clothes like knives, and she knew she had maybe minutes before the cold would take her ability to think clearly. She stumbled off the porch, knowing she couldn't stay there. The boarding house was on the edge of town, and she tried to orient herself toward the main street, but the snow was so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Her shoes, worn thin from months of hard work, filled with snow immediately. Miranda wrapped her arms around herself and pushed forward, her teeth chattering so violently she bit her tongue. She tasted blood. The wind shoved her sideways and she fell into a snowdrift, struggling to get back to her feet. Her dress was soaked now, the wet fabric clinging to her legs and making movement even harder. She tried to call for help, but her voice was stolen by the wind before it even left her throat. She didn't know how long she stumbled through the white darkness. It might have been 5 minutes or 20. Time lost meaning when every second was a battle just to take the next step. Her mind started playing tricks on her, showing her images of her mother's face, her father's workbench back in Pennsylvania, the warm kitchen of the boarding house. She fell again and this time couldn't find the strength to stand. The snow was almost soft now, inviting. She could just rest for a moment. That was when she heard the horse. The sound cut through the storm, a frightened whinny that meant another living creature was nearby. Miranda forced her eyes open, though the snow had crusted on her eyelashes. Through the white she saw a dark shape, massive and moving. Then hands were on her, strong hands that lifted her like she weighed nothing at all. "Got you," a man's voice said, close to her ear. "Hold on now." She couldn't have let go if she wanted to. Her arms wouldn't obey her anymore. She felt herself being lifted onto a horse, felt the warmth of the animal beneath her and the solid presence of the man behind her. He wrapped something around her, a coat that smelled of leather and smoke and horse, and then they were moving. The ride was short but felt eternal. Miranda drifted in and out of awareness, conscious only of the warmth of the man's body against her back and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them. When they stopped, she heard the man dismount, heard him speaking in low tones to the horse. Then he was lifting her again, carrying her toward a building she couldn't quite make out through the snow. The door was locked. She felt him try the handle, heard him curse under his breath. Then he set her down, propping her against the wall, and she heard a sharp crack. He had kicked the door hard. Another crack, and then the sound of splintering wood. The lock gave way, and suddenly they were inside, out of the wind. The absence of that screaming wind was so sudden it was almost shocking. Miranda collapsed onto a wooden floor, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. She heard the man moving around, heard the door being shoved closed, and something heavy dragged in front of it. Then there was the sound of boots on wood, fast footsteps, and the clatter of kindling being arranged. Come on, the man muttered. She heard the strike of a match once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a flame caught. Dim orange light began to fill what she could now see was a small cabin, sparsely furnished but blessedly sheltered from the storm. The man came to her side and lifted her again, this time carrying her to a chair near the growing fire. "Got to get you warm," he said. His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that spoke of time spent in the southern territories. "Got to get these wet clothes off you." Miranda tried to speak, but her jaw wouldn't work properly. She managed a small sound of protest, more from reflex than any real concern about modesty. She was too cold to care about propriety. "Easy now," the man said. "I am not going to hurt you, but you will die if you stay in these wet things. I have got blankets. I will be respectful." Through her blurred vision, she got her first real look at him. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that was wet with snow and strong features that were set in concentration. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking gray-blue, like storm clouds. He moved with efficient purpose, helping her out of her soaked dress and apron, wrapping her in thick wool blankets that he pulled from a trunk in the corner. He averted his eyes as much as possible, and she could see the tension in his jaw that told her he was trying to be a gentleman about the whole situation. When she was wrapped in the blankets, he brought the chair even closer to the fire and then went back outside into the storm. She heard him working with the horse, and a few minutes later he returned, his coat covered in fresh snow. He barred the broken door as best he could, stuffing blankets into the gaps where the cold air was getting through. "Horse is in the lean-to," he said, more to himself than to her. "Should be all right till this blows over." He shrugged out of his wet coat and hung it on a peg near the fire, then grabbed another blanket for himself. For the first time since he had found her, he seemed to really look at her, assessing her condition with those sharp gray-blue eyes. "Can you talk?" he asked. Miranda tried again. This time her jaw cooperated enough to form words, though they came out shaky and weak. Thank you," he nodded. "Name is Pierce Dalton. This is my line cabin. Well, my boss's line cabin, technically. I ride for the Double M Ranch. Was checking the north fence line when the storm hit. Lucky I found you. Miranda Sutton." She pulled the blankets tighter around herself, trying to absorb the heat from the fire. Feeling was starting to return to her extremities, and with it came pain. Her fingers and toes burned. Pierce knelt in front of her and gently took one of her hands in his, examining her fingers. His hands were warm and rough with calluses. "Frostbite, but not too bad. You were lucky. Another 10 minutes out there and you would have lost fingers. Or worse." He looked up at her and she saw concern in his eyes, real genuine concern for a stranger. "What were you doing out in this?" "I got locked out," she said. Her voice was getting stronger as the warmth seeped into her. "The boarding house. Mrs. Henderson's place. I went out for firewood and the door locked behind me." Pierce's jaw tightened. "She did not come looking for you. She probably does not know. I had just gone out. She was in the kitchen with the others." Miranda felt tears prick her eyes, more from relief at being alive than anything else. "I tried to find my way to town, but I could not see anything." "You walked in the wrong direction," Pierce said. He released her hand gently and moved to the small stove in the corner of the cabin. This cabin is half a mile outside town, up in the foothills. You must have gotten turned around completely." He started rummaging through the supplies on a shelf. "Going to make coffee, and I think there is some jerky and hardtack. Not much, but it will help." Miranda watched him move around the small cabin. He was lean but strongly built, moving with the easy grace of someone who spent most of his life on horseback or doing hard physical labor. His clothes were typical cowboy gear: worn denim pants, a flannel shirt, sturdy boots. There was a gun belt hanging on a peg near the door, and a rifle leaning in the corner. He had a day or two of stubble on his jaw, and his dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. The coffee began to fill the cabin with its rich aroma, and Pierce brought her a tin cup filled with the steaming liquid. "Careful, it is hot." She wrapped her hands around the cup, savoring the warmth, and took a careful sip. It was strong and bitter, but wonderful. "You saved my life," she said quietly. Pierce had taken a seat on the floor near the fire, his own cup of coffee in hand. He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "But you are the one who did it. You broke the lock to get us inside." He shrugged. "Owner will not mind. It is just a line cabin. Ranch hands use it when they are working the far pastures. The lock was not much good anyway, old and rusty. I will fix it when the storm passes." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the hearth. The cabin was small, maybe 12 feet square, with just the basic necessities. A narrow cot in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, the trunk that held the blankets, some shelves with supplies. It was rustic and rough, but right now it felt like the most wonderful place in the world to Miranda. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked. Pierce looked toward the door, though there was nothing to see but the blankets he had stuffed in the cracks. "Hard to say. Could blow through in a few hours, could last till morning. These mountain storms are unpredictable." He glanced at her. "You are welcome to the cot. I will sleep on the floor. I cannot take your bed. It is not my bed, it is the ranch's bed, and you are the one who nearly froze to death. You need it more than I do." His tone was firm but not unkind. "Besides, I have slept in worse places. At least it is warm and dry in here." Miranda felt exhaustion creeping over her now that she was warm and relatively safe. Her body ached, her fingers and toes still burned with the pain of returning circulation, and her head felt heavy. "I do not even know how to thank you properly." "Stay alive," Pierce said simply. "That is thanks enough." She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. There was something solid about him, something steady and reliable. He had not hesitated to help her, had broken down a door to get her to shelter, had been nothing but respectful even when circumstances required him to help her out of her wet clothes. She realized she trusted him, which was remarkable given that she had known him for less than an hour. "You live in Idaho City?" Pierce asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "I work there, at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. I came out from Pennsylvania a few months ago." "Long way from home." "I do not have a home anymore. My parents died last year, fever. There was nothing left for me back there, so I came west." She surprised herself with how easily she shared this information. Maybe it was the strange intimacy of their situation, trapped together in a tiny cabin while a blizzard raged outside. "I thought maybe I could find work, start over somewhere new." Pierce nodded slowly. "A lot of people come west for that reason, fresh starts and second chances." He took a drink of his coffee. "Is the boarding house treating you well?" Miranda hesitated. The truth was that Mrs. Henderson was a harsh taskmaster who worked her servants hard and paid them little. But it was employment, and it came with a room and meals, which was more than a lot of people had. "It is work," she said carefully. Mrs. Henderson expects a lot, but I suppose that is fair. The look Pierce gave her suggested he heard what she was not saying, but he did not press the issue. If you are ever looking for different work, the Double M might need help at the ranch house. The owner's wife, Mrs. Morrison, is always saying she could use another pair of hands. The pay is fair and they treat their people right. I will keep that in mind, Miranda said. The coffee and the warmth were making her drowsy. She set down her cup and stifled a yawn. You should get some sleep, Pierce said. He stood and helped her to the cot, steadying her when she swayed slightly. The blankets were still wrapped around her, and he layered another one on top. Your dress is hanging by the fire, should be dry by morning. What about you? She asked, looking up at him. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older, more weathered. I will be fine. Going to keep the fire going and make sure the door holds. He gave her a small smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his serious face into something warmer, more approachable. Sleep. You are safe here. Miranda lay down on the cot, and despite the strangeness of the situation, despite being in a small cabin with a man she had just met, she felt safe. Her eyes drifted closed, and the last thing she saw before sleep took her was Pierce settling down by the fire, his profile strong and watchful against the orange glow. She woke several times during the night, disoriented at first before remembering where she was. Each time she woke, Pierce was there, sometimes adding wood to the fire, sometimes just sitting quietly, keeping watch. Once their eyes met across the small cabin, and he gave her a reassuring nod before she drifted back to sleep. When she finally woke for good, pale gray light was filtering through the gaps around the door and the small window. The wind had stopped. The sudden silence after hours of howling storm was almost eerie. Miranda sat up slowly, wincing at the soreness in her muscles. Every part of her body ached. Pierce was already up, standing by the window and looking out. He glanced over when he heard her move. Morning. Storm passed about an hour ago, left a hell of a lot of snow though. Miranda stood up carefully, the blankets still wrapped around her. She could see her dress hanging near the fire, dry now. I should get dressed. I will step outside, check on the horse, Pierce said, already moving toward the door. He pulled away the blankets he had stuffed in the cracks and shoved the broken door open. Bright white light flooded the cabin, almost blinding after the dimness. Then he was gone, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. Miranda dressed quickly, grateful for the dry fabric even though the dress was wrinkled and stiff in places. She had no comb for her hair, so she did her best to finger comb it into some semblance of order and then braided it simply. When she was as presentable as she could manage, she called out to Pierce. He came back in, stamping snow off his boots. Horse is fine, hungry and restless, but fine. He looked at her, taking in her dressed state, and nodded approvingly. How are you feeling? Sore, but alive thanks to you. She moved to the window and looked out at the transformed landscape. Everything was buried under at least 2 feet of fresh snow, the trees bent under the weight of it, the world blanketed in white. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Can we make it back to town? Yes, but it will be slow going. Horse will have to break trail most of the way. He started gathering up the blankets, folding them with practiced efficiency. We should head out soon. People will be worried about you. Miranda felt a pang of guilt. Mrs. Henderson had probably discovered her missing hours ago. The woman would be furious, likely convinced that Miranda had run off in the night for some foolish reason. She is going to be very angry with me. For nearly dying in a blizzard that you did not cause. Pierce's voice was sharp. That is not right. She will say I was careless. That I should have been more careful with the door. Pierce looked like he wanted to say something harsh about Mrs. Henderson, but he held his tongue. Instead, he said, let me worry about that. I will explain what happened." They prepared to leave, Pierce making sure the fire was completely out and the cabin secured as much as possible given the broken lock. He saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor, and then helped Miranda mount. She had ridden before, but not often, and never in conditions like this. Pierce swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins, and she felt that same sense of safety she had felt last night. The ride back to town was slow and difficult. The horse plunged through snow up to its chest in some places, and Pierce had to guide it carefully to avoid hidden obstacles. The world was silent, except for the labored breathing of the horse and the crunch and squeak of snow. Miranda found herself acutely aware of Pierce's closeness, the solid warmth of him at her back, the strength in his arms as he controlled the horse. They talked as they rode, their voices low as if the white landscape demanded quiet. Pierce told her about the Double M Ranch, about the cattle they raised and the hard work of keeping a ranch running through the brutal Idaho winters. He told her about growing up in Texas, how he had come north 5 years ago looking for work and found it with the Morrisons. He talked about the other ranch hands, about the spring roundups and the long cattle drives. Miranda told him more about Pennsylvania, about her childhood in a small town where her father had been a carpenter and her mother had taken in sewing. She told him about the helpless feeling of watching them sicken and die, about selling everything to pay the debts and having nothing left but a small amount of money and a burning need to be somewhere, anywhere else. She told him about the long journey west, about the fear and excitement of arriving in a rough mountain town where everything was different from what she had known. By the time they reached the outskirts of Idaho City, Miranda felt like she had known Pierce Dalton for much longer than one night. There was an ease between them, a comfortable familiarity that seemed strange given the circumstances, but also perfectly natural. The town was digging out from the storm, people shoveling paths and checking on neighbors. Heads turned as Pierce rode down the main street with Miranda in front of him, and she could see the curiosity and speculation in the townspeople's eyes. News would spread quickly. She could only imagine what stories would be circulating by noon. When they reached the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson was outside talking to the sheriff, a stocky man with a thick mustache. She whirled around when she heard the horse, and her face went through a rapid series of expressions: relief, anger, suspicion. "Miranda Sutton, where on earth have you been?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was shrill. "I've had half the town looking for you." Pierce dismounted and then helped Miranda down, his hand steady at her waist. "Madam, there has been a misunderstanding. Miss Sutton got locked out during the storm last night. She nearly froze to death. I found her by chance and took her to the line cabin for shelter." The sheriff stepped forward, his eyes assessing Pierce and then Miranda. "That true, miss?" "Yes, sir," Miranda said quietly. "I went out for firewood and the door locked behind me. I tried to get back in, but Mrs. Henderson could not hear me over the storm. I got lost trying to find help." Mrs. Henderson's face flushed. "The door does not lock by itself. You must have done something foolish." "The door does lock by itself, madam," Pierce said, and there was steel in his polite tone. "It is an old lock and it sticks. I have seen it happen before when I have delivered supplies here. Miss Sutton did nothing wrong. She is lucky to be alive." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Storm like that, easy to get turned around. Good thing you found her, young man. What is your name?" "Pierce Dalton. I ride for the Double M. The Morrisons are good people. I am sure they will vouch for your character." The sheriff looked at Mrs. Henderson. "Seems like everything worked out fine, madam. Maybe get that lock fixed, though." Mrs. Henderson looked like she wanted to argue, but she could see the sheriff was not on her side. She turned her glare on Miranda instead. "Get inside. You have missed a whole day of work. You will have to make it up." "She will do no such thing," Pierce said, and the authority in his voice made everyone look at him in surprise. "She nearly died last night. She needs rest, not more work. Now you see here, young man, I run this establishment and I will decide what my employees do or do not do. And I am telling you that, if you work her today, I will personally make sure everyone in this town knows how you locked a girl out in a blizzard and then tried to punish her for surviving it." Pierce's eyes were hard. "How do you think your business will fare when word gets around?" There was a tense silence. Mrs. Henderson's face turned an alarming shade of red, but she knew she was beaten. "Fine, she can have the day off, but I expect her to work double tomorrow." "That sounds fair," the sheriff said diplomatically. He touched his hat brim to Miranda. "Glad you are all right, miss. And thank you, Mr. Dalton, for being in the right place at the right time." Pierce nodded. He turned to Miranda and the hard expression on his face softened. "You take care of yourself, Miss Sutton. Remember what I said about the double M if you are ever looking for different employment." "Thank you," Miranda said, holding his gaze, "for everything." She saw something flicker in his eyes, something warm and almost reluctant, as if he did not want to leave. But he just touched his hat brim to her and mounted his horse. She watched him ride away down the snow-covered street, a strange ache in her chest that she did not quite understand. The next few days passed in a blur of work. Mrs. Henderson made good on her promise to work Miranda extra hard, finding every possible task to keep her busy from dawn until late at night. But Miranda did not mind as much as she might have before. Every time she felt overwhelmed or exhausted, she thought about Pierce Dalton and the kindness he had shown her. She thought about his offer of work at the Double M Ranch. 3 days after the blizzard, Miranda made a decision. She finished her morning chores at the boarding house, then went to Mrs. Henderson and gave her notice. The woman was furious, accusing Miranda of ingratitude and foolishness, but Miranda stood firm. She had enough money saved to get by for a week or two, and if the job at the Double M did not work out, she would find something else. She was done being treated like she was worthless. She packed her few belongings into the small carpet bag she had brought from Pennsylvania and walked out of the boarding house without looking back. The main street of Idaho City was busy with afternoon traffic, miners and cowboys and townspeople going about their business. Miranda asked directions to the Double M Ranch and was told it was about 5 miles south of town, down the main road. It was a long walk, but the day was clear and cold and beautiful. The snow had been packed down on the road by wagon traffic, making the going easier. Miranda walked with purpose, her breath pluming in the cold air, her heart beating faster with nervousness and excitement. She saw the ranch before she reached it, a collection of buildings spread across a wide valley with mountains rising in the background. There was a large main house, several barns and outbuildings, corrals with horses, and in the distance she could see cattle grazing in fields that had been cleared of snow. It looked prosperous and well-maintained. Miranda walked up the long drive to the main house, suddenly nervous. What if Pierce had just been being polite? What if there was no job after all? But she had come this far, and she was not going to turn back now. She knocked on the door of the main house and waited. After a moment, it opened to reveal a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. She looked surprised to see a stranger on her doorstep. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. "My name is Miranda Sutton. I am looking for work. Pierce Dalton told me that you might need help here at the ranch house." The woman's expression cleared. "Oh, you are the girl from the blizzard. Pierce told us all about it. Please come in." She stepped back, ushering Miranda inside. "I am Catherine Morrison. My husband and I own this ranch." The interior of the house was warm and welcoming, with sturdy furniture and colorful rugs on the wooden floors. It smelled of baking bread and wood smoke. Mrs. Morrison led Miranda to a comfortable kitchen and insisted she sit down and have coffee and fresh bread. "Pierce said you were working at that terrible boarding house in town," Mrs. Morrison said as she poured the coffee. "I have heard stories about how Mrs. Henderson treats her help. You are smart to leave." "I hope I am not presuming too much by coming here," Miranda said carefully. "Pierce mentioned you might need help, but if there is no position available, I understand." "Oh, there is always work to be done on a ranch," Mrs. Morrison said with a warm smile. "I have been managing the household myself with just occasional help from the ranch hands' wives, but I could certainly use someone full-time." "Can you cook, clean, do laundry and mending?" "Yes, madam. I have been doing all of that at the boarding house, and I learned from my mother before that." "Well then, I would be happy to hire you. The pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You would have your own room in the house and you would eat with us. The work is hard but fair, and we treat our people with respect." Mrs. Morrison studied Miranda with shrewd but kind eyes. "Does that sound acceptable to you?" $30 a month was more than Miranda had been making at the boarding house, and room and board on top of that was generous. "That sounds more than acceptable, madam. Thank you." "Wonderful. When can you start?" "Right now, if you would like." Mrs. Morrison laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I like your attitude. Let me show you to your room and you can get settled. We will eat supper in a few hours and you can meet my husband and the ranch hands then." Miranda's room was small but comfortable, with a real bed, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and even a small window that looked out over the ranch yard. It was better than anywhere she had lived since leaving Pennsylvania. She unpacked her few belongings, changed into a fresh dress, and reported back to the kitchen to help Mrs. Morrison with supper preparations. The two women worked together easily, and Miranda found herself liking Mrs. Morrison more and more. The woman was efficient but not harsh, and she talked while they worked, telling Miranda about the ranch and the people who worked there. There were 6 full-time ranch hands, she said, including Pierce. Her husband William had built the ranch up from nothing over the past 20 years, and they were proud of what they had accomplished. As evening approached, the ranch hands started coming in for supper. The dining room had a long table that could seat a dozen people, and the men filed in, taking off their hats and washing up before sitting down. Miranda recognized Pierce immediately. He was the last one in, and when he saw her helping Mrs. Morrison serve the food, his face registered complete surprise. "Miss Sutton," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I did not know you were here." "She is our new household help," Mrs. Morrison announced cheerfully. "Started today. Miranda, let me introduce you to everyone." She went around the table, naming each man. There was Tom, the foreman, a grizzled man in his 50s with a weathered face and sharp eyes. There was Billy, barely 20, with red hair and freckles. There was Sam and his brother John, both in their 30s, quiet men who nodded politely. There was old Pete, who had worked for the ranch since the beginning, and of course Pierce. Miranda murmured greetings and then helped Mrs. Morrison bring out the food. It was a hearty meal, beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. The men ate with good appetites, complimenting the food, and the conversation flowed easily. This was nothing like the boarding house where everyone ate in tense silence. Here there was laughter and friendly teasing, stories about the day's work and plans for tomorrow. Miranda found her eyes drawn to Pierce again and again. He was quieter than the others, but when he spoke his comments were thoughtful and often made the other men laugh. She noticed that Tom, the foreman, seemed to respect his opinion, often asking Pierce what he thought about various decisions. Pierce was younger than most of the other hands, but it was clear he knew his job well. After supper, the men thanked Mrs. Morrison and Miranda for the meal and headed back out to the bunkhouse. Pierce lingered, helping to clear the table despite Mrs. Morrison's protests that it was not necessary. "I wanted to say I am glad you took the job," Pierce said quietly to Miranda when Mrs. Morrison was in the kitchen. "You will be much happier here." "I think you are right," Miranda said. She was very aware of how close he was standing, how her heart sped up when he looked at her. "Thank you for suggesting it. I was hoping you would come. I have been thinking about you, wondering if you were all right." He said it simply, honestly, and Miranda felt warmth spread through her chest. "I have been thinking about you too," she admitted. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Miranda saw in his eyes the same attraction she was feeling. But then Mrs. Morrison came back from the kitchen, and the moment was broken. Pierce said good night and headed out to the bunkhouse, and Miranda went to finish cleaning up the kitchen. That night, lying in her comfortable bed, Miranda thought about Pierce Dalton and smiled in the darkness. Over the following weeks, Miranda settled into life at the Double M Ranch. She rose early to help Mrs. Morrison prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent her days cooking and cleaning and mending, and fell into bed each night pleasantly exhausted. It was hard work, but it was satisfying work, and the Morrisons were everything Mrs. Morrison had promised, fair and respectful employers who treated Miranda like a valued member of their household. She saw Pierce every day at meals, and gradually they found more opportunities to talk. He would come in early to chop wood for the kitchen stove and linger to chat with her while she kneaded bread. She would take the lunch pails out to the men when they were working close to the house, and Pierce would walk back with her, telling her about what they were doing that day. In the evenings after supper, if the weather was mild, they would sometimes walk together around the ranch yard, their conversations growing longer and more personal. Miranda learned that Pierce was 26 years old, 4 years older than her. He had left Texas when he was 21 after his father died, and his mother remarried a man Pierce could not abide. He had worked various ranch jobs across the territories before settling at the Double M 3 years ago. He loved the work, loved the animals and the land and the hard physical labor that left him tired but satisfied. He had no plans to move on. He was saving money with the dream of maybe having his own small spread someday, though he admitted it would take years to save enough. Pierce learned that Miranda loved reading, though she had few books. He started bringing her books from the small collection in the bunkhouse, and they would discuss them over breakfast preparations. She told him about her dreams of having a real home again, of belonging somewhere. She admitted that she was lonely sometimes, that making friends was hard when you were always the hired help. Pierce understood that feeling. Cowboys moved around so much that deep friendships were rare. The other ranch hands noticed the growing closeness between Pierce and Miranda, and there was some good-natured teasing, but it was never mean-spirited. The Morrisons noticed too, and Miranda saw Mrs. Morrison watching them with knowing eyes and a small smile. Winter deepened, bringing more snow and bitter cold, but the ranch work continued. The cattle had to be fed and tended, fences had to be maintained, and there was always something that needed fixing. Miranda marveled at the sheer amount of work it took to keep a ranch running, and her respect for the Cowboys grew. It was in early February, nearly 2 months after the blizzard, that everything changed between Miranda and Pierce. There was a dance in town, a social event to break up the monotony of winter. Mrs. Morrison encouraged Miranda to go, saying she deserved some fun and offered to lend her a nicer dress. Pierce asked Miranda if he could escort her, his voice gruff with nervousness, and she said yes with a smile that made his whole face light up. The dance was held in the town hall, which had been decorated with bunting and lanterns. There was a small band playing fiddle music, and the room was crowded with ranchers and townsfolk, everyone dressed in their best clothes. Miranda wore Mrs. Morrison's borrowed dress, a deep blue that brought out her eyes, and she had taken extra care with her hair. When Pierce saw her, he stopped dead and just stared. "You look beautiful," he said finally, and the sincerity in his voice made Miranda blush. "You look very handsome yourself," she said, and it was true. Pierce had cleaned up well, his hair neatly combed, his shirt freshly pressed, his boots polished. He offered her his arm and they entered the dance together. They danced nearly every dance, Pierce proving to be surprisingly light on his feet. He held her carefully, respectfully, but she could feel the strength in his arms and the warmth of his hand on her waist. Between dances they talked and laughed, and Miranda could not remember the last time she had been so happy. During a break in the music, they stepped outside to cool off. The night was cold and clear, stars blazing overhead in the black sky. Their breath plumed in the air as they stood on the steps of the town hall, the sounds of music and laughter muffled behind them. "I am having such a wonderful time," Miranda said, looking up at the stars. "So am I." Pierce was quiet for a moment, then said, "Miranda, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, saw the seriousness in his expression. "What is it?" "I have not been able to stop thinking about you since the night of the blizzard. I know we have not known each other long, but I think I am falling in love with you." He said it plainly. No flowery words or elaborate declarations, just simple truth. "I do not have much to offer right now. I am just a cowboy with some money saved and a dream of my own land someday. But I am hardworking and honest, and I would treat you right. I would make you happy if you would let me." Miranda's heart was pounding. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight rasp of stubble under her fingers. "I am falling in love with you too," she said softly. "I think I started that night when you saved my life. You are the kindest, most decent man I have ever met, Pierce Dalton." He kissed her then, a gentle kiss full of promise and hope. Miranda kissed him back, her arms going around his neck, and for a long moment the cold in the world and everything else faded away. There was only Pierce and the feeling of being cherished and safe. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Does this mean you will court me properly?" Pierce asked. "I think it means exactly that," Miranda said. They went back inside hand in hand, and everyone who saw them knew that something had changed between the cowboy and the household help. The teasing was relentless but affectionate, and Pierce took it with good humor, never letting go of Miranda's hand. The courtship was everything Miranda could have hoped for. Pierce was attentive and romantic in his own quiet way. He brought her wildflowers when spring started to break through the late winter snow. He carved her a small wooden box for her keepsakes. He read to her in the evenings when his work was done, the two of them sitting close together in the parlor while Mrs. Morrison sewed nearby with a contented smile on her face. He was also respectful, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their kisses were sweet and relatively chaste, and though Miranda could feel the desire in him, Pierce always pulled back before things went too far. He wanted to do this right, he told her. He wanted to marry her properly when the time was right. As spring arrived in earnest, melting the snow and turning the mountain meadows green, Pierce started talking more seriously about the future. He had been saving money for 5 years, and he had enough now for a down payment on a small piece of land. He had his eye on a 100-acre parcel about 10 miles from the Double M, good land with water and grazing. If he could buy it, he could start small, maybe with a dozen head of cattle and build up from there. It would be hard work, he told Miranda as they sat together on the porch of the main house one evening. Harder than what I do now. It would be just me, at least at first. I could not afford to hire help, and the house would be small, probably just a cabin to start. I do not need a big house, Miranda said, lacing her fingers through his. I just need a home, with you. Pierce looked at her, love and hope warring in his expression. Are you saying what I think you are saying? I am saying that if you are asking me to marry you, my answer is yes. He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they broke apart they were both breathless and grinning like fools. I will buy that land, Pierce said. I will build us a home. It might take a few months to get everything ready, but then we can be married. Is that all right with you? That sounds perfect, Miranda said. They told the Morrisons that night, and the couple was delighted. Mrs. Morrison hugged Miranda and told her she could not be happier. And Mr. Morrison shook Pierce's hand and offered to help him with advice on buying the land and getting started. The other ranch hands congratulated them, and there was a celebratory atmosphere in the bunkhouse and the main house alike. The next months were a whirlwind of activity. Pierce bought the land, taking out a loan for what his savings did not cover, and immediately began the hard work of building a cabin. Mr. Morrison let him have 2 days a week to work on his own place, and the other ranch hands pitched in when they could, helping to raise the walls and put on the roof. Miranda sewed curtains and quilts, prepared supplies, and daydreamed about what their life together would be like. She also helped Mrs. Morrison more than ever, determined to leave her employer with everything organized and running smoothly. Mrs. Morrison was already interviewing potential replacements, though she said nobody could ever truly replace Miranda. The cabin came together slowly but surely. It was small, just 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small storage room. But it was well built and solid, with a good fireplace and windows that let in plenty of light. Pierce worked himself nearly to exhaustion getting it ready, but Miranda could see the pride in his eyes every time he showed her the progress. By midsummer, the cabin was ready. Pierce had brought in basic furniture, some of it built by his own hands, some of it purchased in town. There was a table and chairs, a bed frame with a rope mattress, a dresser, shelves for dishes and food. It was sparse, but it was theirs. They were married on a warm July day in 1879, just over a year after the blizzard that had brought them together. The ceremony was held at the small church in Idaho City, with the Morrisons and all the ranch hands in attendance, as well as a scattering of townspeople who had come to know Miranda and Pierce. Miranda wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Morrison had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Pierce had picked that morning. Pierce stood at the front of the church looking nervous and happy in his best suit, and when Miranda walked down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy that several people in the congregation teared up. The ceremony was short and simple, but when the minister pronounced them man and wife and Pierce kissed her, Miranda felt like the luckiest woman in the world. There was a reception at the Double M Ranch, with food and music and dancing. People congratulated the newlyweds and offered advice and well wishes. As evening approached, Pierce and Miranda slipped away, climbing onto the wagon Pierce had borrowed to take them to their new home. The ride to their cabin was filled with nervous laughter and stolen kisses. When they arrived, Pierce insisted on carrying Miranda over the threshold, and she laughed as he nearly bumped her head on the doorframe. Then they were inside, alone together for the first time as husband and wife. The cabin glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming. Pierce took Miranda's hands and looked into her eyes. "I love you," he said. "I promise I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." "I love you too," Miranda said, "and you already make me happy. You have since the night you saved my life." They came together then, kisses turning heated, hands exploring, and when Pierce carried her to the bedroom, Miranda went willingly and eagerly. He was gentle with her, attentive and caring, making sure she was comfortable and ready. The intimacy they shared that night was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love they felt for each other. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the rope bed, talking softly and dreaming about the future. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. Pierce labored from dawn until dusk, tending his small herd of cattle, mending fences, clearing more land. Miranda kept the cabin spotless, cooked hearty meals, tended a vegetable garden, and helped Pierce with the ranch work whenever she could. Money was tight, but they had everything they needed and each other. The Morrisons remained good friends and neighbors, often inviting Pierce and Miranda over for Sunday dinners. The other ranch hands from the Double M would stop by occasionally to lend a hand with a big project or just to visit. Miranda made friends with some of the other ranch wives in the area, women who understood the challenges and rewards of frontier life. As autumn approached, Miranda discovered she was pregnant. She told Pierce one evening after supper, and he was speechless with joy. He held her so tightly she laughed and told him to be careful of the baby. He immediately became protective, insisting she rest more, trying to take over all the heavy chores. Miranda had to remind him that she was pregnant, not fragile, but she loved his concern. The pregnancy was relatively easy, and Miranda continued to work through the winter, though Pierce fretted constantly. When her time came in early spring of 1880, Mrs. Morrison came to stay and help, along with the local midwife. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Pierce, pacing outside the cabin, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But finally, he heard the sound he had been waiting for, the strong, lusty cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Morrison came out with a huge smile. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy, beautiful boy, and Miranda is fine, just tired." Pierce rushed inside to find Miranda propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. He knelt beside the bed and looked at his son for the first time, overwhelmed with emotion. "He is perfect," Pierce whispered. "He has your eyes," Miranda said softly. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Pierce knew. "Thomas, after my father. Thomas William Dalton." "Thomas," Miranda repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas." The baby squinted up at them, tiny fists waving, and Pierce felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. This was his son, his family, his life. Raising a baby while trying to run a ranch was exhausting, but Pierce and Miranda managed. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and happy, and watching him grow became their greatest joy. Miranda was a natural mother, patient and loving, and Pierce discovered he loved being a father. He would come in from a long day of work and immediately take Thomas, holding his son while Miranda prepared supper, talking to the baby about everything and nothing. The ranch slowly prospered. Pierce's herd grew as he carefully managed his resources and made smart decisions. By the time Thomas was 2, Pierce had 30 head of cattle and had hired his first ranch hand, a young man fresh from the East who was eager to learn. With help, Pierce was able to expand more, clearing more land and building a proper barn. Miranda continued to be the backbone of their home, managing the household with skill and efficiency. She made extra money by selling eggs and butter in town, and her vegetable garden became the envy of the neighboring ranches. She also got involved in the small community, helping to organize church socials and being a friend to the other wives. When Thomas was 3, Miranda became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she was sick for much of it. Pierce worried constantly, but Miranda reassured him that she was fine, just tired. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Catherine after both their mothers, was born in the summer of 1883. She was tiny and delicate where Thomas had been big and robust, with dark curls and gray-blue eyes like her father. Pierce was completely smitten with his daughter, and Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister. The cabin that had seemed adequate when it was just the two of them was now cramped with 2 children, so Pierce began planning an expansion. Over the next year, with help from his ranch hand and occasional assistance from the Double M crew, he added 2 more rooms to the cabin, giving the children their own space. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch continued to grow slowly but steadily. Pierce hired a second ranch hand and was able to increase his herd to 50 head. Miranda became pregnant twice more, giving birth to another son, Michael, in 1885, and another daughter, Elizabeth, in 1887. Their cabin-turned-house was full of noise and laughter, and the chaos of raising 4 children. The years passed in a blur of work and family and small joys. Pierce taught Thomas to ride and rope, and the boy showed real promise as a cowboy. Sarah was sweet and gentle, helping her mother in the garden and with the younger children. Michael was bold and adventurous, always getting into some kind of mischief, and Elizabeth was the baby who everyone doted on. Through it all, Pierce and Miranda's love for each other only deepened. They still found time to be alone together, stolen moments when the children were asleep, and they could sit together on the porch, holding hands and talking about their day. The passion that had sparked in the blizzard had matured into something deeper and more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and unshakable commitment. There were hard times too, of course. Winters when money was tight and they had to make difficult decisions. A terrible drought one summer that decimated their hay crop. The year, Thomas broke his arm falling from a horse, and they spent 2 terrifying days waiting to see if infection would set in. The night Sarah had a fever so high, Miranda sat up with her for hours, praying desperately for her daughter to recover. But they weathered every storm together, just as they had weathered that first blizzard. Pierce's strength and steadiness balanced Miranda's practicality and warmth. They were a team in the truest sense, facing challenges together and celebrating victories together. By 1890, Pierce had built his small ranch into a respectable operation. He had 75 head of cattle, 3 full-time ranch hands, and was known throughout the territory as an honest rancher who produced quality stock. The cabin had been expanded again, now a proper ranch house with 6 rooms and a real parlor. Miranda had curtains in all the windows, rugs on the floors, and a kitchen that was the envy of every woman in the county. The Morrisons were still their closest friends, though both were getting older. Mr. Morrison had turned much of the day-to-day operations of the Double M over to his son, and he and Mrs. Morrison spent more time taking it easy. They loved visiting Pierce and Miranda's growing family, and Mrs. Morrison often joked that she felt like a grandmother to the Dalton children. On a summer evening in 1890, Pierce and Miranda sat on their porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The children were inside, the older ones helping the younger ones get ready for bed. The sounds of laughter and minor squabbles drifted out through the open windows. "Can you believe it has been 12 years since we got married?" Miranda said, leaning her head on Pierce's shoulder. 13 years since the blizzard, Pierce added. Best storm of my life, Miranda laughed. I nearly died in that storm. But you did not. I found you. And then I fell in love with you. Pierce put his arm around her and pulled her close. You changed my life, Miranda. Before you, I was just drifting. Working, saving money, but not really living. You gave me purpose. You gave me a family and a home and a reason to build something lasting. You saved my life in more ways than one, Miranda said softly. I was so lost when I came west, so alone, and then you found me and gave me everything I ever wanted. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they heard Thomas telling his younger siblings a story, his voice animated and dramatic. They heard Sarah laughing at something Michael said, and Elizabeth's sleepy protest that she was not tired yet. We did good, did we not? Pierce said quietly. We did very good, Miranda agreed. As the years continued to pass, the Dalton family remained close-knit and happy. Thomas grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, allowing Pierce to slow down as he reached his 40s. Sarah fell in love with the son of a neighboring rancher and had a beautiful wedding in 1900. Michael decided he wanted to be a school teacher and went to Boise for training, much to everyone's surprise. Elizabeth was still young, a bright and spirited girl who loved horses more than anything. Pierce and Miranda grew older together gracefully, their love as strong as ever. They became grandparents when Sarah had her first child, a boy she named after Pierce. The joy of holding his grandson for the first time brought tears to Pierce's eyes, and Miranda teased him about going soft in his old age. Through everything, they never forgot the blizzard that had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of that night, they would sit together and tell the story to their children and eventually their grandchildren. How Miranda had gotten locked out, how Pierce had found her against all odds, how he had broken the lock to give her shelter. It became a family legend, a tale of fate and love and second chances. They told the story of how they fell in love, how Pierce had built their ranch from nothing, how Miranda had made a home in the wilderness. They told stories of hardship and triumph, of raising 4 children on the frontier, of building a life together through sheer determination and love. As Pierce approached his 60th birthday in 1912, he sometimes reflected on his life with a sense of wonder. The angry young man who had left Texas all those years ago was long gone, replaced by a contented husband, father, and grandfather. The ranch that had started with just 12 head of cattle, and a dream now sprawled across 500 acres, run efficiently by Thomas with help from his younger siblings when they visited. Miranda, at 56, was still beautiful to Pierce, though her dark hair was now streaked with silver and there were lines around her eyes. She moved a little slower than she used to, but she was still the heart of their family, the one everyone came to with their problems and their joys. On a cold December night in 1912, almost exactly 34 years after the blizzard, Pierce and Miranda sat by their fireplace in the comfortable parlor of their ranch house. All their children were grown and gone, though they visited often. The house was quiet except for the crackle of the fire and the ticking of the clock on the mantel. You ever regret it? Pierce asked suddenly. Coming west, working at that terrible boarding house, getting locked out in that blizzard. Miranda looked at him in surprise. Regret it? Pierce, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. If I had not gotten locked out, if you had not found me, none of this would exist. Our children, our grandchildren, this life we built together. How could I possibly regret any of it? I just want to make sure you have been happy, Pierce said. I know this was not an easy life. I know there were times when things were hard." Miranda took his hand, the same hand that had pulled her from the snow all those years ago. "I have been happy every single day since you broke that lock and gave me shelter. You did not just save my life that night, Pierce. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything." Pierce kissed her, a gentle kiss that held 34 years of love and commitment. "You gave me everything too." They sat together by the fire, holding hands, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Outside, snow began to fall, gentle flakes drifting down from the dark sky, and neither of them were afraid. They had weathered worse storms than this, and they would weather whatever came next together. The Dalton ranch continued to thrive for generations. Thomas passed it on to his son, who passed it to his son after that. The story of Pierce and Miranda was told and retold, becoming part of the family history, a reminder of where they came from and what real love looked like. Pierce passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1920 at the age of 68, with Miranda holding his hand. She followed him just 2 years later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children made sure to place their graves where they could see the mountains, the same mountains that had brought them together in that terrible, wonderful blizzard so many years before. The headstones were simple but elegant, marking the resting place of Pierce Dalton, 1852–1920, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, and Miranda Dalton, 1856–1922, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. Between the two headstones, their children planted a tree, a sturdy pine that would stand as a living monument to their parents' enduring love. Visitors to the ranch, family members and friends alike, would often climb that hill to pay their respects. They would stand by the graves and look out at the view, the valley and the ranch house and the mountains beyond, and they would remember the story. The story of a woman locked out in a blizzard, and the cowboy who broke the lock to save her. The story of two people who found each other in the worst of circumstances and made the best of lives together. And in the telling and retelling of that story, Pierce and Miranda lived on, their love immortal, their legacy secure. They had started with nothing but each other and built an empire of family and love that would last for generations. They had proven that even in the harshest wilderness, even in the coldest winter, love could not only survive but thrive. Years turned into decades, and the Dalton Ranch continued to grow and prosper. The great-grandchildren of Pierce and Miranda knew the story by heart, had heard it told at every family gathering. They knew about the blizzard of 1878, about the boarding house with the faulty lock, about Pierce's desperate search through the storm and his decision to break down the door of the line cabin. They knew about the courtship and the wedding and the building of the ranch. They knew their family history was built on a foundation of love and determination and second chances. The old line cabin where Pierce had taken Miranda that night was long gone, reclaimed by the wilderness. But the Double M Ranch still stood, run now by the great-grandchildren of William and Catherine Morrison. The two families remained close, their histories intertwined. In the town of Idaho City, which had shrunk considerably from its gold rush heyday but still existed as a small community, there was a plaque in the Historical Society that mentioned Pierce and Miranda Dalton among the early settlers who had helped build the region. Their story was just one of many tales of hardship and triumph on the frontier, but to their descendants, it was the most important story of all. The values that Pierce and Miranda had lived by, hard work, honesty, family loyalty, and enduring love, were passed down through the generations. Their great-great-grandchildren, living in a world that would have been unimaginable to Pierce and Miranda, still knew where they came from. They still understood that their family's success was built on the love of two people who refused to give up on each other or on their dreams. And so the story endured, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create legacies. A cowboy and a servant girl, brought together by a blizzard and a broken lock, had built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. They had created a family, a ranch, a legacy of love that would echo through time. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the size of the ranch or the number of cattle or the money in the bank. What mattered was the love that Pierce and Miranda had shared, the family they had raised, and the example they had set for all who came after them. They had shown that with love and determination, anything was possible. They had shown that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best outcomes. They had shown that a single act of kindness, breaking a lock to give shelter to a stranger in a storm, could change everything. Their story was complete, their ending happy, their love eternal. And in the hearts of their descendants, Pierce and Miranda Dalton lived on forever, the cowboy and his love, together always.